A chilling scream pierces the fog-shrouded village of Blackthorn Hollow, where a man lies dead, stabbed with an antique dagger, no footprints in the mud. Hercule Poirot, summoned by a cryptic letter, steps into a web of murder and secrets. 6. Lives are claimed, each bound by a mysterious smuggler's knot. Tied to a decades-old conspiracy, the Ravens Pact. A vanished child, a hidden vault, and a killer who strikes without a trace. Who is the Raven, and what fortune is worth such? Bloodshed. As Poirot unravels a trail of betrayal, from a locked room to a deadly cliff, every clue raises a question: will the mastermind outwit him? Or will his little grey cells triumph in his darkest case yet? Chapter 1. The whisper in the fog. The train rattled through the English countryside, its wheels clacking a steady rhythm against the iron tracks, as if urging the world to keep pace with its relentless march. Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his gloved hands folded neatly over the silver head of his cane, his moustache impeccably trimmed, a silent sentinel against the chaos of the world. Outside, the landscape was swallowed by a thick, rolling fog, the kind that seemed to breathe, with secrets cloaking the hills and hedgerows in a shroud of mystery. The year was 1938, and Poirot, though retired in name, found himself drawn once more into the labyrinth of human deceit by a letter, a single, perplexing letter. It had arrived 3 days prior at his London flat, penned in the meticulous hand of Dr. Elias Hawthorne, a physician, an old acquaintance from a case long buried in Poirot's memory. The letter was brief, its tone urgent yet maddeningly vague. My dear Poirot, I implore you to come to Blackthorn Hollow at once. There is a darkness here, a secret that threatens us all. I cannot say more on paper. Trust in your little grey cells, for they are needed now more than ever. Yours, Elias. Poirot had turned the letter over in his hands, noting the slight tremble in the script, the ink smudged as if written in haste. It was not like Elias, a man of science and precision, to speak of darkness or to beg. Something was amiss now. As the train slowed, its whistle cutting through the fog like a mournful cry, Poirot adjusted his hat and stepped onto the platform of Blackthorn Hollow's modest station. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The station master, a wiry man with a face like crumpled parchment, tipped his cap but offered no words, his eyes darting nervously toward the village beyond. Poirot noted this, as he noted all things, the twitch of a lip, the flicker of a glance, for in such details the truth often hid. Monsieur Poirot said, his voice crisp, "Where might I find Dr. Elias Hawthorne?" The station master hesitated, his fingers tightening on the brim of his cap. "Dr. Hawthorne, he's at the Willow House, sir, up the lane past the church, but it's late and the fog's thick. Best wait till morning." Poirot's green eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "Mercy, but I am not one to be deterred by fog or hour. The lane, you say?" The man nodded reluctantly, pointing toward a narrow path that vanished into the mist. Poirot set off, his polished shoes clicking against the cobblestones, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Blackthorn Hollow was a village frozen in time, its thatched cottages and ivor-clad walls huddling together as if guarding secrets from the world. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting pools of light that did little to pierce the fog. Poirot's mind, however, was alight, turning over the letter's words, the station master's unease. The very atmosphere of this place, which seemed to pulse with an unspoken dread. The Willow House stood at the edge of the village, a Georgian relic with tall windows and a sagging roof, its garden overgrown with brambles. Poirot knocked, the sound echoing like a challenge to the night. The door creaked open, revealing Dr. Elias Hawthorne himself, his face pale and lined, his one-steady hands trembling as he ushered Poirot inside. "Poirot, thank God you've come," Elias whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting the shadows to eavesdrop. The parlour was dimly lit, cluttered with medical books and faded photographs. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to warm the room's chill. Elias poured brandy with unsteady hands, offering a glass to Poirot, who declined with a polite wave. "Mon ami, your letter was most intriguing," Poirot said, seating himself in a worn armchair, his posture impeccable. "But it lacks, shall we say, the clarity. What is this darkness you speak of?" Elias sank into a chair, his eyes haunted. "It's difficult to explain without sounding mad. Blackthorn Hollow. It's not what it seems. There are whispers, rumors, of something old, something hidden. People are afraid, Poirot. They lock their doors at night, not for thieves, but for something else." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "And you, a man of science, believe these whispers?" "I didn't, at first." Elias's voice cracked. "But 2 weeks ago, I found a note slipped under my door. It said, 'The truth is buried, but it stirs.' No signature, no explanation. Then, last week, old Mrs. Carvachet runs the post office or something in the woods. She won't speak of it, but she hasn't left her house since." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And you think this is connected to a crime?" Elias opened his mouth to reply when a scream tore through the night, high and sharp, like a blade slicing the fog. The doctor froze, his glass slipping from his hand to shatter on the floor. Poirot was already on his feet, cane in hand, moving toward the door with a speed that belied his age. "Stay here, mon ami," Poirot commanded, his tone brooking no argument. He stepped into the fog, the scream's echo guiding him toward the village square. The mist swirled around him, shapes looming and dissolving like phantoms. His heart, though steady, quickened with the thrill of the chase not of a man, but of a truth. The square was a small, open space ringed by shops and a stone fountain, its water black under the gaslight. There, sprawled on the cobblestones, lay a man, his eyes wide and unseeing, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. An antique dagger, its hilt carved with intricate vines, protruded from his chest. Poirot knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, his gloved fingers hovering over the body. The man was in his 60s, dressed in fine but outdated clothes, his face etched with a final expression of shock. Poirot's eyes darted to the ground muddy from recent rain, yet pristine around the body. Not a single footprint marred the earth, save for Poirot's own. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his mind racing. A murder without footprints. It was impossible, yet here it was. The fog seemed to tighten around him, as if conspiring to hide the truth. Voices approached, villagers drawn by the scream, their faces pale, their whispers a chorus of fear. Among them was a young woman, her auburn hair escaping a hasty bun, her eyes wide with horror. "Who is he?" Poirot asked, rising to face her. She swallowed, clutching her shawl. "Mr. Reginald Vance. He owned the manor on the hill. Kept to himself, mostly. Who would do this?" Poirot noted her trembling hands, her quick glance toward the shadows. "And you are Clara Vance," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "His daughter." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The daughter of the victim, here at the scene, yet her grief seemed tempered by something else in Gar. perhaps, or fear. He filed this away, turning as Dr. Hawthorne arrived, breathless, his face ashen. "Reginald?" Elias stammered, staring at the body. "I warned him to leave, Poirot. I told him the village wasn't safe." "Warned him of what, precisely?" Poirot pressed. But Elias only shook his head, his lips tight. The local constable, a burly man, named Hargrove, pushed through the growing crowd, his lantern casting harsh shadows. "Move back, all of you," he barked, then froze at the sight of the body. "Good Lord, Mr. Vance." "Monsieur Constable," Poirot said, stepping forward, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I will assist in this matter. The scene must be preserved. No one is to touch the body until I have examined it fully." Hargrove blinked, clearly unaccustomed to such authority, but nodded. "Right, sir. I'll fetch the coroner." Poirot returned to the body, his mind a whirl of observations. The dagger's angle suggested a precise strike, not a frenzied attack. The victim's coat was unbuttoned, as if he had been caught off guard, yet his hands bore no defensive wounds. And the absence of footprints, how could a killer approach and flee without leaving a trace in the mud? Poirot's gaze swept the square, noting the fountain's proximity, the cobblestones' uneven edges, the gas lamp's flickering light. Something tugged at his mind, a detail just out of reach. Clara lingered nearby, her eyes fixed on her father's body. Poirot approached her, his tone gentle but probing. "Mademoiselle, when did you last see your father?" "Yesterday," she said, her voice flat. "We argued. He didn't approve of my plans to leave Blackthorn. Said I was abandoning my duty." "Duty?" Poirot tilted his head. "To what, may I ask?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the shawl. "The manor, the family name. He was obsessed with it, always talking about secrets, legacies. I thought he was just old and stubborn." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And tonight, where were you when the scream was heard?" "At home," she said quickly. "I heard it and ran out. I didn't know it was him until..." Her voice broke, but her eyes remained dry. Poirot thanked her, his mind cataloguing her words, her posture, the faint tremor in her voice. Grief. Yes, but something else lurked beneath resentment, perhaps, or guilt. He turned back to the body, kneeling once more to examine the dagger. Its hilt was old, possibly Elizabethan, the kind kept in a collection, not carried for murder. This suggested premeditation, a killer with access to Vance's private possessions. The crowd murmured, their voices a low hum of speculation, caught fragments tales of curses, of strangers seen in the woods, of Vance's reclusive habits. One voice, sharp and insistent, cut through. "It's the Hollow's curse," he was warned. Poirot turned to see an elderly woman, her face weathered, her eyes bright with conviction. "And you are, madame?" he asked. "Mrs. Carver," she said, clutching a rosary. "I told him to leave, just like I told Elias. The Hollow doesn't forgive those who dig too deep." Poirot's moustache twitched again. "Dig, madame, into what?" She clamped her lips shut, shaking her head, and shuffled back into the crowd. Poirot made a mental note to visit her post office come morning. The constable returned, trailing a nervous coroner who began his examination, muttering about the coldness of the body. Poirot stepped back, allowing the man to work, but his eyes never left the scene. Dr. Hawthorne approached, his face still pale. "Poirot, this is what I feared. It's begun, mon ami. You must be plain with me," Poirot said, his voice low but firm. "What is this curse, this darkness? Speak, or I cannot help you." Elias glanced at the crowd, then leaned closer. "There's a story in Blackthorn, older than anyone alive. A child vanished, long ago, and with it, something valuable. Vance was obsessed with it. He said he'd found proof, something that could ruin the village. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Proof? You say, of what nature?" Before Elias could answer, a gust of wind swept through the square, extinguishing a gas lamp and plunging half the scene into shadow. The crowd gasped, and Poirot felt a prickle at the back of his neck. Not fear, but the thrill of a puzzle taking shape. He turned to the fountain, its water still and black, and noticed something new, a faint ripple, as if something had been dropped into it moments before. He approached, peering into the depths, but the fog and darkness obscured his view. "Monsieur Hargrove," he called, "bring your lantern here." The constable complied, and the light revealed a glint at the fountain's bottom, a small silver object. Half buried in silt, Poirot reached in, his sleeve soaking, and retrieved a pocket watch, its face cracked, its hands frozen at 11:43. He turned it over, noting an inscription, "To R.V. with loyalty." "Reginald Vance," Poirot murmured. "This was his, yet it lies here, apart from the body. Curious, is it not?" Hargrove frowned. "Could have fallen out when he was stabbed." "Perhaps," Poirot said, but his tone suggested otherwise. The watch was too far from the body, the fountain too deliberate a hiding place. He pocketed it, intending to examine it later, and turned to the crowd. Now dispersing into the fog, "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying with quiet authority, "a crime has been committed, but fear not. Hercule Poirot is here, and the little grey cells, they do not rest. Return to your homes, but know this, the truth, it cannot hide forever." The villagers murmured, some with awe, others with suspicion, and drifted away. Clara lingered a moment, her eyes meeting Poirot's, then turned and vanished into the mist. Elias, too, retreated, promising to meet Poirot at dawn. Alone with the constable and the coroner, Poirot took one last look at the body, the dagger, the pristine mud. The puzzle was complex, the pieces scattered, but he felt the familiar stir of his mind, the spark that drove him to unravel the impossible dot as he walked back to the Willow House. The fog seemed to whisper, carrying echoes of that scream, that curse, that secret. Poirot's cane tapped a steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the night's unease. He would solve this, he vowed, not for glory, but for order, for justice, for the truth that lay buried in Blackthorn Hollow's heart. The chapter closed with him standing at the Willow House's gate, the fog curling around him like a living thing, his eyes bright with resolve. Chapter 2. The locked room, enigma. The dawn broke over Blackthorn Hollow with a reluctant grey light, as if the sun itself hesitated to pierce the village's lingering fog. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of Dr. Elias Hawthorne's parlour, his silhouette sharp against the muted glow, his mind already dissecting the events of the previous night. The murder of Reginald Vance, stabbed in the open square with no footprints to betray the killer, was a puzzle that demanded his full attention. But it was the daggerantic, ornate, and oddly out of place that tugged most insistently at his thoughts. Where had it come from, and how had it found its way into Vance's heart? Elias, still shaken, served tea with trembling hands, the porcelain clinking softly. "You'll go to the manor today, Poirot?" he asked, his voice low, as if afraid the walls might overhear. That's where Vance lived alone, mostly, except for the occasional servant. If there's an answer, it's there. Poirot turned, his green eyes sharp. Oui, mon ami, the scene of the crime tells one story, but the home of the victim, it tells another. I must see this manor, and I must see it now. The walk to Vance's manor was a silent one, the village still hushed under the weight of the murder. The manor loomed on a hill overlooking Blackthorn Hollow, its stone facade weathered but imposing, its windows like dark, unblinking eyes. Ivy clung to the walls, curling around the eaves as if trying to choke the house's secrets. Constable Hargrove met Poirot at the gate, his face grim, a ring of keys jangling in his hand. Place has been locked up since last night, Hargrove said, unlocking the heavy oak door. No one's been in or out. Vance's housekeeper, Mrs. Lyle, swears she left at 6, and he was alone. Poirot nodded, stepping into the foyer. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish. The manor was a labyrinth of shadowed rooms, each filled with relics of a bygone era, paintings of stern ancestors, mahogany furniture polished to a mirror sheen, and glass cabinets displaying curiosities from distant lands. Poirot's cane tapped softly as he moved, his eyes scanning every detail. A crooked picture frame, a scuff on the floor, a curtain slightly askew. Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot said, pausing by a grand staircase. This dagger, it is not the kind one carries in a pocket. It is a collector's piece, n'est-ce pas? Where might such a thing be kept in this house? Hargrove scratched his chin. There's a study upstairs. Vance was always fussing over his collections, old weapons, books, that sort of thing. If it's anywhere, it's there. The study was on the second floor, a cavernous room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk cluttered with papers. In one corner stood a glass-fronted cabinet, its lock gleaming under the weak light filtering through heavy drapes. Inside, swords, pistols, and daggers were arranged with meticulous carex for one empty velvet slot, the exact size and shape of the murder weapon. Poirot's moustache twitched. Voila, the dagger came from here. But the cabinet, it is locked, and the glass, it is intact. How, then, was the weapon taken? Hargrove frowned, peering at the lock. No scratches, no signs of tampering. Maybe Vance took it out himself. Possible. Poirot mused, but his tone suggested doubt. He examined the cabinet closely, his gloved fingers tracing the edges. The lock was sturdy, the kind that required a specific key, yet there was no key in sight. He turned to the desk, sifting through papers, letters, ledgers, a faded map of the village. One document caught his eye, a will dated 6 months prior, naming Clara Vance as the sole heir, only to be scratched out and replaced with a charitable trust. The ink was fresh, the change recent, interesting, Poirot murmured. A father disinherits his daughter. This, it is a motive, Nan. Before Hargrove could respond, a soft creak echoed from the hallway. Poirot's head snapped up, his senses alert. Monsieur, stay here, he said, moving swiftly to the door. The hallway was empty, but a faint draught stirred the air, carrying the scent of lavender. Poirot followed it, his steps silent, to a narrow door at the end of the corridor. It was ajar, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. He returned for Hargrove and a lantern, then led the way down. The stairs ended in a small, musty room, its walls lined with shelves of dusty bottles, wine perhaps, or something older. At the far end was a wooden panel, slightly misaligned. Poirot pressed it, and with a groan, it swung inward, revealing a tunnel carved into the earth, its walls damp and glistening. A secret passage, Hargrove gasped. In a place like this, Poirot's eyes gleamed. Every old house has its secrets, monsieur. This one, it leads somewhere, and I intend to find out where. The tunnel was narrow, forcing Poirot to stoop, his cane useless in the uneven dirt. The lantern cast flickering shadows, making the walls seem to pulse. After several minutes, the passage opened into a larger chamber, its air thick with the scent of mildew. Stone walls rose around them, etched with faded symbols, crosses, crescents, and something that looked like a raven's head. In the center stood a wooden chest, its lid splintered as if recently forced open. Poirot knelt, examining the chest. Inside were papers, yellowed with age, and a single photograph of a young boy. No more than 10, his eyes wide and solemn. A note was pinned to the photograph, its script faint but legible. The debt must be paid. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered. This is no mere murder. This is a story, long buried, now unearthed. Hargrove shifted uneasily. What does it mean, sir? It means, Poirot said, rising, that Reginald Vance was not killed for who he was, but for what he knew. This passage, this chest, they are pieces of a puzzle. But we must return to the study. There is more to find. Back in the study, Poirot's attention turned to a bookshelf behind the desk. One book, a leather-bound volume on local folklore, protruded slightly. He pulled it, and with a soft click, a section of the shelf swung open, revealing another hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with Vance's tight, obsessive script. Poirot skimmed the entries, his brow furrowing. Acutes, he said, reading aloud. The Raven's Pact is real. I have found the proof, hidden where no one would look, but they watch me. They know I am close. The Raven's Pact, Hargrove echoed. What's that? Poirot closed the journal, tucking it under. His arm, that, monsieur, is what we must discover. But first, I must speak with Mademoiselle Clara. Her father's will, this passage, this journal, they are connected. And she, I think, knows more than she admits. They returned to the village, where Clara was found at the local inn, nursing a cup of tea. Her auburn hair was neatly pinned now, but her eyes were guarded, flicking to Poirot as he approached. Mademoiselle, he said, seating himself opposite. Your father's death. It is a tragedy, but it is also a mystery. Tell me, why did he change his will? Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. He thought I was ungrateful. Said I didn't care about the family legacy. We fought about it, yes, but I didn't. She trailed off, her voice catching. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And this legacy, what was it? He wrote of a Raven's Pact. Do you know this term? Her eyes widened, a flash of fear crossing her face before she masked it. It's just an old story. Something about a deal made long ago, a promise to protect the village. Father was obsessed with it, always digging into the past. I told him to let it go, and did he? Poirot pressed. She shook her head, looking away. No, he said he'd found something, documents, maybe. He wouldn't tell me more. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words, her hesitation, the way her hands trembled despite her calm facade. He rose, thanking her, but as he stepped outside, he caught sight of a figure watching from across the street, a man in a dark coat, his face obscured by a hat. The man turned and vanished into an alley before Poirot could pursue. Back at the Willow House, Poirot sat by the fire, the journal open before him. Elias hovered nearby, anxious. "What did you find, Poirot? Is it as bad as I feared? Worse?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice grave. "This dagger, it was taken from a locked cabinet, yet no lock was broken. The passage, it leads to a chamber with secrets of its own. And this journalet speaks of a pact, a debt, a truth that someone killed to keep hidden. I must know more, Elias. Tomorrow, I visit Mrs. Carver. She spoke of a curse, and I think she knows its shape." The chapter closed with Poirot staring into the fire, the journal's words echoing in his mind. The locked room, the secret passage, the cryptic note, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and he would unravel them, no matter how dark the pattern. Outside, the fog thickened, but Poirot's resolve burned brighter, a beacon in the gathering storm. Chapter 3. Shadows of the past. The morning air in Blackthorn, hollow, carried a chill that seemed to seep into the bones, as if the village itself were reluctant to warm under the sun's tentative rays. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed, despite the early hour, walked purposefully toward the village library, a squat stone building tucked behind the church. The journal found in Reginald Vance's study weighed heavily in his coat pocket, its cryptic references to the Raven's Pact, and a buried truth gnawing at his mind. The locked room, the secret passage, and the absence of footprints in the square were pieces of a puzzle. But the photograph of the young boy and the note that debt must be paid suggested a deeper, older wound. Today, Poirot sought answers from Miss Evelyn Grey, the village librarian, whose name had surfaced in whispers as one who knew Blackthorn's hidden history. The library's door creaked as Poirot entered, the scent of aged paper and wax greeting him. Shelves loomed like sentinels, their books worn but meticulously ordered. Miss Evelyn, a woman in her late 50s with sharp grey eyes and a severe bun, looked up from a ledger at her desk. Her smile was polite but guarded, like a gatekeeper, assessing an intruder. "Mr. Poirot," she said, closing the ledger with a snap. "I heard you were in the village. A terrible business, Mr. Vance's death. How may I assist you?" Poirot removed his hat, his green eyes meeting hers with disarming warmth. "Mademoiselle Grey, you are the keeper of Blackthorn's stories, Nest ce par. I seek to understand the history of this place, particularly the tales of a child who vanished and a pact, perhaps, that lingers in memory." Evelyn's fingers tightened on her pen, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "Old stories, Mr. Poirot. Every village has them: ghosts, curses, lost children. They're more folklore than fact." Yet Poirot said, leaning on his cane, "These stories, they leave traces. A photograph, a note, a secret chamber. I found such things in Mr. Vance's manor, and I think you know of them." Her lips parted, but before she could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of Poirot's vision, a figure slipping behind a bookshelf. He turned, his senses sharp, but the aisle was empty. Evelyn followed his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Just the wind, perhaps," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Poirot smiled thinly. "The wind, it does not wear boots, mademoiselle. Let us be frank. Mr. Vance was searching for something, a truth tied to a child's disappearance. You know of this, we—" Evelyn hesitated, then sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Very well. There's a story, older than me, about a boy who vanished in 1875. He was the younger brother of Edward Vance, Reginald's father. The family claimed he drowned in the river, but no body was ever found. Rumors spread, some said he was taken, others that he was hidden to protect a secret. The village called it the Raven's Pact, a deal struck by the Vance family to secure their wealth. Poirot's moustache twitched, and this secret it was worth killing for. Evelyn's eyes darkened. I don't know, but Reginald was digging into it, asking for records, old letters. He came here last month, demanding access to the parish archives. I told him they were incomplete fires, floods. You know how it is. We, Poirot said, his tone dry. How convenient. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. And these archives, where are they kept? Before she could answer, a scream shattered the quiet, not unlike the one that had drawn Poirot to the square the previous night. It came from outside, sharp and desperate. Poirot moved swiftly to the door, Evelyn trailing behind, her face pale. In the churchyard, a small crowd had gathered around a crumpled form near the lich gate. Poirot pushed through, his heart sinking as he recognized the man, Tom Brodie, the manor's groundskeeper, his throat bound by a thick rope, the knot tight and intricate, his eyes bulging in death. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, kneeling beside. The body, the rope was no common knot, was identical to the one described in Vance's journal, a maritime hitch, precise and deliberate. The ground, still damp from the night's dew, showed scuffled footprints, but none leading away. Another impossible crime. Constable Hargrove arrived, breathless, his face a mask of disbelief. 2 murders in 2 days. What's happening to this place? Poirot rose, his expression grim. It is not the place, monsieur, but the people. Someone is silencing those who know too much. Brodie, he worked at the manor. He may have seen something. Hargrove nodded. He tended the grounds, fixed the fences. Quiet man, kept to himself. Poirot's gaze swept the crowd, noting Clara Vance's absence and the nervous glances of the villagers. Mrs. Carver, the postmistress, stood at the edge, her rosary clutched tightly, muttering prayers. Poirot approached her, his voice gentle. Madame, you spoke of a curse last night. Did Mr. Brodie, too, dig too deep? She flinched, her eyes darting to the body. I warned him, just like I warned Vance. The hollow doesn't forgive. It takes what's owed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And what is owed, madame? She turned away, her lips trembling, and shuffled back toward her shop. Poirot let her go, knowing he'd visit her soon. For now, he returned to the library, where Evelyn stood by the window, her composure fraying. Mademoiselle Poirot said, this second death, it changes things. Brodie was no random victim. He knew something, perhaps about the passage I found in the manor. Tell me what lies in those archives. Evelyn's hands twisted together. There in the basement, locked away. But I swear, Mr. Poirot, they're just old records, births, deaths, land deeds. Nothing worth killing for. Then let us see, Poirot said, his tone firm. She led him to a narrow door behind her desk, unlocking it with a key from her pocket. The basement was cold, its stone walls lined with wooden crates. Poirot opened one, finding ledgers and letters, some dating back a century. One packet, tied with faded ribbon, caught his eye. It contained letters between Edward Vance and an unnamed correspondent, mentioning the boy and the pact that binds us. Interesting, Poirot said, slipping a letter into his pocket for later study. These speak of a debt, a child, a secret kept by the powerful. Brodie, I think, stumbled upon this truth. Evelyn shook her head. I didn't know. I thought it was just history. Poirot studied her, noting the tremor in her voice, the way her eyes avoided his. History, mademoiselle, has a way of bleeding into the present. I will return to these archives, but first I must examine Brodie's belongings. At the groundskeeper's cottage, a small cluttered space near the manor, Poirot found little of note, few tools, a worn Bible, a tin of tobacco. But under the bed, hidden in a loose floorboard, was a scrap of paper with a single word, Raven. Poirot's pulse quickened. The same symbol from the chamber, the same name from Vance's journal. Brodie had known something, and it had cost him his life. As Poirot emerged from the cottage, he spotted a figure watching from the tree line, a man, tall and thin, his face obscured by a scarf. The man turned and vanished into the woods before Poirot could call out. Hargrove, who had been securing the churchyard, joined him, frowning. Who was that? I do not know, Poirot said, but I will find out. This raven, it is the key. Brodie's knot, Vance's dagger, are signatures of the same hand, a hand that fears exposure. Back at the Willow House, Poirot spread the journal, the letter, and the photograph on the table, his mind weaving connections. Elias, hovering anxiously, poured whiskey, his hands steadier now. What does it mean, Poirot? 2 men dead, and... For what? For a secret, Poirot said, tapping the photograph. A child vanished, a pact was made, and now someone kills to keep it buried. But the knot, mon ami, is unique, a clue to the killer's past. I must know its origin. The chapter closed with Poirot sketching the knot on a piece of paper. Its loops and twists, a cipher to the murderer's identity. The fog outside had lifted slightly, but the village felt no less heavy, its secrets coiling tighter around Poirot's resolve. He would trace this knot, follow its threads, and uncover the truth, no matter how dark the shadows of Blackthorn Hollow's past. Chapter 4. The alibis cracked. The sun hung low over Blackthorn Hollow, its light struggling to pierce the ever-present mist that clung to the village like a jealous lover. Hercule Poirot stood outside the Willow House, his gloved hands clasped. Behind his back, his eyes fixed on the distant manor where secrets seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The murders of Reginald Vance and Tom Brodie, bound by the same intricate maritime knot, pointed to a killer with a purpose tied to the cryptic Raven's pact and a child's disappearance long ago. The scrap of paper with the word Raven burned in Poirot's mind, a beacon in the fog of this case. Today, he would test the alibis of those closest to the victims, starting with Clara Vance, whose guarded demeanor and strained relationship with her father hinted at deeper truths. Poirot made his way to the village in a quaint establishment with creaking floorboards and a fire that did little to warm the chill of suspicion in the air. The innkeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Harrow, nodded as he entered, her eyes wary. Miss Clara's in the back parlour. Mr. Poirot, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. She's been there since dawn, barely touched her breakfast. Merci, madame, Poirot said, his voice smooth as he navigated the narrow hallway to the parlour. Clara sat by a window, her auburn hair catching the weak light, her fingers tracing the rim of a cold teacup. She looked up as Poirot entered, her expression a mix of defiance and fatigue. Mademoiselle Vance, Poirot began, seating himself opposite her, his cane resting against his knee. We must speak plainly. Your father's death, And now, Mr. Brody's, they are connected by more than a knot. You were in the square when your father was found, yet your grief, it seems, tempered. Tell me, where were you truly when the scream was heard? Clara's eyes flickered, but she held his gaze. I told you, I was at home. I heard the scream and ran out. I didn't know it was father until I saw him. Poirot tilted, his head, his moustache twitching slightly. But the timing, it is curious. The square is a good 10 minutes from your cottage, yet you were among the first to arrive. And this he produced a torn ticket stub from his pocket, retrieved from the inn's floor where Clara had stood the previous day. A train ticket, dated last night, for a journey to London at 10:30 p.m. The scream was at 11:45. How do you explain this? Clara's face paled, her fingers tightening on the teacup. I didn't go. I bought the ticket, yes, but I changed my mind. I was angry with father, wanted to leave Blackthorn for good. But I stayed. And where is this ticket now? Poirot asked, his tone gentle but unrelenting. I must have dropped it, she said quickly. I don't know. Poirot leaned back, his eyes never leaving her. Mademoiselle, a lie. It is like a crack in a fine vase, small at first, but it spreads. If you were at home, who can confirm this? No one, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I live alone, but I swear I didn't hurt him. Poirot nodded, filing away her words. He rose, thanking her, but as he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of her reflection in the parlour's mirror. Her hands were trembling, her eyes darting to the door. Suspicion, not proof, but enough to keep her in his thoughts. Next, Poirot sought out Mayor Redmond, a man whose charming smile and polished demeanour had already caught his attention at the crime scene. Redmond's office was in the town hall, a grand building with stained glass windows depicting Blackthorn's pastoral history. The mayor greeted Poirot with a firm handshake, his blue eyes warm but calculating. Mr. Poirot, a pleasure, though I wish it were under better circumstances, Redmond said, gesturing to a leather chair. 2 murders in our quiet villages. Unthinkable. How can I help? Poirot sat, his posture impeccable. Monsieur Mayor, you were in the square last night. Where were you before the scream? Redmond leaned back, his smile unwavering. At home, with my wife. We were hosting a small dinner for the church council. They left around 11 o'clock, and I was tidying up when I heard the commotion. And your wife, she confirms this? Poirot asked. Of course, Redmond said, a touch too quickly. You're welcome to ask her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And Mr. Brody, the groundskeeper, did you know him well? Redmond shrugged. As well as anyone. He worked for Vance. Kept the manor grounds tidy. Decent fellow, never caused trouble. Yet Poirot said he was killed with the same knot as Mr. Vance. A curious coincidence, Nan. Redmond's smile faltered, just for a moment. I suppose so. But Blackthorn's a small place, coincidences happen. Poirot thanked him, and left, his mind turning over Redmond's polished answers. The mayor's alibi was solid, yet there was a rehearsed quality to it, like a speech memorized for an audience. Outside, Poirot paused by the town hall steps, noting a cigarette butt in the grass. Still fresh, its brand uncommon for the village. He pocketed it, a small clue in a case growing ever more tangled as he walked back toward the village centre. A boy darted from an alley, nearly colliding with him. The lad, no more than 12, clutched a folded paper, his eyes wide with fear. Mr. Poirot, sir, he whispered, thrusting the note into Poirot's hand before bolting away. Poirot unfolded it, his pulse quickening at the scrawled words. "Stop digging, or you're next." The note was written in black ink, the letters jagged, as if penned in haste. Poirot tucked it into his pocket, his mind racing. A threat meant he was close to close for the killer's comfort. He glanced around, but the street was empty, the fog curling like a warning. Undeterred, he headed to Mrs. Carver's post office, determined to press the old woman for answers about the curse she so feared. The post office was a cramped shop, its counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. Mrs. Carver stood behind it, her rosary clicking as she sorted letters. She stiffened at Poirot's entrance, her eyes narrowing. "You again," she said. "Haven't you stirred enough trouble, Madame?" Poirot said, his voice calm but firm. "Trouble is already here. 2 men are dead, and you speak of a curse. I think you know more than you say. What is this debt the hollow demands?" Her hands froze, the rosary slipping to the counter. "You found the note, didn't you? In the manor's chamber. It's the same as always. The Vance family made a pact, and it cost a life. Now it's costing more." "A pact with whom?" Poirot pressed. She shook her head, her lips tight. "I've said too much. Leave it be, Mr. Poirot, or the hollow will claim you too." Poirot leaned closer, his voice low. "Madame, I am Hercule Poirot. The hollow, it does not frighten me. But a killer, he does not hide forever. Tell me, did Brodie speak of this pact?" Mrs. Carver's eyes darted to the window, then back. "He came here last week, asking about old letters, one sent to Vance's father. I told him the post keeps no such records. He left, but he was scared, muttering about ravens." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. As he stepped outside, he noticed a shadow move across the street, a figure, too quick to identify, slipping into the fog. The same watcher from the churchyard. He couldn't be sure, but the threat in his pocket felt heavier now. Returning to the Willow House, Poirot spread his clues on the table. The ticket stub, the cigarette butt, the threatening note, and the letter from the archives. Elias watched, his face drawn. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, Poirot. This note's a warning." "Oui," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "But a warning means fear, and fear means the truth is near. Clara's alibi, it cracks. Redmond's, it is too perfect. And this knot, it is not just a signature, it is a history. Tomorrow I will find a sailor, someone who knows this knot's secret." The chapter closed with Poirot staring at the note, its jagged letters, a challenge to his resolve. The fog outside thickened, but his mind was clear, cutting through the village's shadows. The alibis were crumbling, the past was rising, and Poirot would not rest until the killer's mask was torn away. Chapter 5. The Knot Secret. The morning in Blackthorn Hollow dawned with a brittle clarity, the fog parting just enough to reveal the jagged outlines of the village's rooftops. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the Willow House's garden, his breath visible in the crisp air, his mind a whirl of connections. The threatening note, "Stop digging, or your next," lay folded in his pocket, its words a spur rather than a deterrent. The murders of Reginald Vance and Tom Brodie, linked by the distinctive maritime knot, pointed to a killer with a past, a purpose, and a secret tied to the elusive Raven's pact. The knot, Poirot knew, was no mere flourish, it was a signature, a clue to the killer's identity, and he intended to unravel its origins. He set out for the village's edge. where Elias had mentioned a retired sailor, Captain Amos Reed, lived, in a weathered cottage overlooking the river. Reed was a man of the sea, Elias had said, who might recognize the knot's peculiar loops and twists. The path wound through frost-kissed meadows, the river's murmur a constant companion. Poirot's cane tapped a steady rhythm, his thoughts as precise as his steps. Clara's cracked alibi, Mayor Redmond's polished answers, and Mrs. Carver's cryptic warnings formed a web. But the knot was the thread that could pull it apart. The cottage was a low, salt-stained structure, its roof sagging under the weight. Of years smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of tar and tobacco hung in the air. Poirot knocked, and the door opened to reveal Captain Reed, a grizzled man with a face like weathered oak, his eyes sharp beneath a tangle of white brows. He leaned on a crutch, one leg ending at the knee, a relic of some long-ago voyage. "Mr. Poirot, is it?" Reed's voice was gravelly, his gaze appraising. "Elias said you'd come. Something about a knot, eh?" "We capitaine," Poirot said, stepping inside. The cottage was cluttered with nautical relics jarts, a sextant, a coiled rope on the wall. Poirot produced a sketch of the knot, drawn from memory of Brodie's murder. "This was used in 2 killings. It is familiar to you." Reed took the sketch, his fingers tracing the loops. His expression darkened, and he handed it back. "That's a smuggler's hitch, rare as hen's teeth. Used by a crew I ran with in my youth, off the Cornish coast. We called ourselves the Ravens, kept our cargo secret, tied our knots tight. Only a handful knew it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The Ravens, you say? And this crew, they operated here, in Blackthorn Hollow?" Reed nodded, limping to a chair. "Aye, in the 1870s. We used the river, moved goods under cover of night. The Vance family, they owned the land, turned a blind eye for a cut, but it ended badly. A boy went missing, and the crew scattered. I swore off the life after that." "The boy," Poirot said, leaning forward. "He was a Vance." Reed's jaw tightened. "Edward Vance's brother, young William. Some said he saw too much, got taken to keep him quiet. Others thought he drowned. Either way, the Ravens disbanded, and the village buried the story." Poirot's mind raced, connecting the photograph from the manor's chamber to Reed's tale. "And this knot, it is a mark of those Ravens." "Aye," Red said. "Whoever's using it now, they know our ways. Or they learned from someone who did." Poirot thanked him, his thoughts churning as he left the cottage. The knot tied the murders to a smuggling ring, to a vanished child, to a pact that lingered like a curse. But before he could pursue this lead, a shout echoed from the village centre, urgent and sharp. Poirot hurried back, his cane a blur, arriving to find a crowd gathered outside the bakery, its windows dark despite the morning hour. Constable Hargrove pushed through, his face ashen. "It's Mrs. Finch, the baker," he said, meeting gaze. "She's dead, sir. Same as the others." Inside the bakery, the air was thick with the scent of yeast and death. Mrs. Finch, a stout woman in her 40s, lay slumped behind the counter, a rope around her neck. The smuggler's hitch, unmistakable. Flour dusted the floor, but no footprints marred it. Another impossible crime. Poirot knelt, noting a faint bruise on her wrist, as if she'd been grabbed before the rope was tied. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his eyes scanning the shop. A tray of buns lay scattered, suggesting a struggle, but the back door was bolted from the inside. How had the killer entered and left? His gaze fell on a small ledger by the till, its pages marked with cryptic entries, not sales, but names and numbers, some circled in red. One entry stood out: Raven 250 delivered. Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot said, pocketing the ledger. This is no ordinary bakery. Mrs. Finch, she was involved in something, perhaps blackmail, perhaps worse. Hargrove frowned. Blackmail, she was just a baker. Nan, Poirot said, his voice firm. She was a keeper of secrets, and it cost her life. We must search her home. Mrs. Finch's cottage was a short walk away, its neat garden a stark contrast to the chaos of her death. Inside, Poirot found a locked drawer in her desk, its key hidden in a teapot. The drawer held letters, some addressed to Vance, others to unknown recipients, all hinting at payments for silence. One letter, crumpled, as if read repeatedly, mentioned a meeting at the old mill at midnight, signed only with a raven's feather drawn in ink intercescent. Poirot said, his mind alight. The raven, it is not just a name, it is a person, a shadow moving through this village, and this meeting, it is tonight. Hargrove shifted uneasily. You're not thinking of going, sir? It could be a trap. Poirot's moustache twitched. A trap, oui, but also an opportunity. The killer expects me to fear, but Hercule Poirot, he does not run from shadows. Back at the Willow House, Poirot shared his findings with Elias, who listened with growing dread. A smuggling ring, Poirot, after all these years, and Mrs. Finchy was such a quiet woman. Quiet, mon ami, but not innocent, Poirot said, spreading the ledger and letters on the table. She knew of the raven, perhaps demanded payment for her silence, and this it ties the past to the present. Tonight, at the mill, I will see who answers the raven's call. Elias paled. You can't go alone. It's too dangerous. Poirot's eyes gleamed with resolve. Danger, it is the price of truth. But I will not be reckless. I will ask Hargrove to watch from a distance. The killer, he thinks he is clever, but the little grey cells, they are cleverer still. The chapter closed with Poirot preparing for the midnight rendezvous, the ledger's entries and the raven's feather burning in his mind. The village was silent, the fog creeping back like a conspirator, but Poirot's determination was a beacon. The not secret had led him to the mill, and there he would face the raven or the shadow it cast. Chapter 6. Midnight at the Miltha Night in Blackthorn Hollow was a tapestry of shadows, the fog weaving through the village like a thief, muffling sound and sight. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of a narrow lane, his black overcoat blending with the darkness, his cane a silent sentinel in his hand. The old mill, a crumbling relic by the river, loomed ahead, its broken wheel creaking in the sluggish current. The ledger's cryptic note, a meeting at midnight, signed with a raven's feather, had drawn him here, a beacon in the labyrinth of murders that now numbered 3, Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, and Mrs. Finch, all bound by the smugglers. Hitch, all silenced for what they knew. Poirot's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of nearing a truth cloaked in Blackthorn's past. He had instructed Constable Hargrove to watch from a distance, hidden among the willows that fringed the river bank. Hargrove had protested, his ruddy face etched with worry, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. Monsieur, the killer expects fear, he had said. I give him instead the little grey cells. Now, as the village clock struck 11:30, Poirot moved toward the mill, his steps silent on the damp grass, his eyes scanning the fog for movement. The mill's door hung ajar, its hinges rusted, groaning softly as Poirot slipped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mould and old grain, the floor littered with broken sacks and splintered wood. A single lantern hung from a beam, casting a weak, flickering light that danced across the walls. Poirot's gaze darted to the shadows, his senses alert. A faint scrape, like a boot on stone, came from the upper floor. He gripped his cane tighter, its silver head a reassuring weight, and ascended the creaking stairs dot at the top. A loft opened before him, its windows shattered, letting in tendrils of fog. A cloaked figure stood near a pile of old crates, their back to Poirot, their silhouette blurred by the mist. Poirot's voice cut through the silence, calm but commanding. "Monsieur, or perhaps Madame, you are late for your rendezvous. But Hercule Poirot, he is always on time." The figure stiffened, turning slowly. The lantern's light caught the edge of a hood, obscuring the face. But Poirot noted the glint of a ring on the figure's hand, a silver band with a raven's head. "You're a fool to come here," the figure said, their voice low, deliberately distorted. "You think you can unravel what's been buried for decades." Poirot's mustache twitched. "The truth, it does not stay buried. 3 are dead, tied with a knot only a raven would know. You are one of them, n'est-ce pas? Or do you serve another?" The figure laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "You're clever, Poirot, but not clever enough. The child's fate was sealed long ago. Leave it, or the hollow will swallow you too." Before Poirot could respond, the figure hurled a crate toward him, wood splintering as it crashed to the floor. Poirot sidestepped, his agility belying his age, but the figure darted through a side door, vanishing into the night. Poirot gave chase, his cane tapping as he navigated the mill's maze of corridors, but the fog outside swallowed the figure's trail. He paused by the river, catching his breath, when something glinted in the mudder locket, its chain broken, half buried in the bank. He retrieved it, wiping away the grime. The locket opened to reveal a miniature portrait of a boy, identical to the photograph from Vance's secret chamber. The inscription inside read, "William, forever, ours." Poirot's mind raced. The child, William Vance, was at the heart of this mystery, and the locket tied the killer to the manor's hidden past. Hargrove emerged from the willows, his lantern swinging. "Did you see him, sir?" "I heard a crash, but this blasted fog, I saw," Poirot said, pocketing the locket. "A figure, cloaked, with a ring of the raven. They spoke of a child's fate, but they fled before I could unmask them. This locket, it is another piece of the puzzle." Back at the Willow House, Poirot examined the locket by lamplight, Elias hovering anxiously. "William Vance," Poirot said, showing him the portrait. "Your letter spoke of a darkness, mon ami. Is this the boy you meant?" Elias's face crumpled, his hands shaking as he sank into a chair. I suspected. Years ago, I found records in my father's study. He was the village doctor before me. They mentioned a boy taken to protect a secret. I thought it was just a story, but Reginald was obsessed, said he'd found proof William didn't drown. I warned him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. And now, Poirot said, someone kills to keep that proof hidden. But the locket, it was dropped tonight, perhaps in haste. The killer is growing careless. Before Elias could reply, a frantic knock rattled the door. Hargrove burst in, his eyes wide. "Dr. Hawthorne, you're needed at once. It's you, sir. They're saying you're gone." Elias blinked, confused. "Gone, I'm right." "Here, not you," Hargrove stammered. "Your cane, it was found by the river, near the mill. Everyone thinks you're dead. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mon Dieu, a ruse, perhaps, to draw attention. Show me. The riverbank was a chaos of villagers, their lanterns casting eerie glows through the fog. At the water's edge lay Ilias' cane, its ebony shaft unmistakable, half submerged in the mud. Poirot knelt, noting the absence of footprints, just as with Vance's murder. "This is no accident," he said, his voice low. "Someone placed it here to make us believe Ilias is lost. But why?" Hargrove shook his head. "To scare us. To stop you poking around." "Perhaps," Poirot said, rising, "but it is a desperate act. The killer knows I am close. This cane, it is a distraction, but it tells me something else. The killer was at the mill tonight, watching, waiting." Elias, shaken but resolute, clutched Poirot's arm. "What now, Poirot, if they're targeting me?" "You stay safe," Poirot said, his tone firm. "Lock your doors, trust no one. Tomorrow I will search the manor again. The locket, the chamber, the raven, they are linked, and I will find how." The chapter closed with Poirot standing by the river, the locket in his hand, its portrait. A silent witness to a decades-old crime. The fog swirled, the village hushed, but Poirot's mind was alight, piecing together the killer's moves. The midnight meeting had revealed more than the killer intended, and Poirot would follow the trail, no matter how perilous the path. Chapter 7. The doctor's confession. The dawn over Blackthorn Hollow was a pale, reluctant thing, as if the sun feared to illuminate the village's mounting secrets. Hercule Poirot stood by the riverbank where Dr. Elias Hawthorne's cane had been found, his sharp eyes scanning the muddy ground for clues the fog might have missed. The locket from the mill, bearing the portrait of young William Vance, rested in his pocket, its inscription, "William, forever ours," a haunting echo of a past crime. 3 murders, Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, and Mrs. Finchtide by the smuggler's hitch, pointed to a killer desperate to bury the truth of the Raven's pact. The staged disappearance of Elias, marked by his abandoned cane, suggested the killer's net was tightening, but Poirot's resolve was a steel blade. Unyielding, he returned to the Willow House, expecting to find Ilias shaken but safe. Instead, the house was empty, the fire cold, a single overturned chair hinting at haste. Poirot's heart quickened, not with panic, but with the urgency of a hunter closing in on prey. A note on the table, scrawled in Ilias's hand, read, "Gone to Ashford. Must confirm something. Back soon." Ashford was the nearest town, a 30-minute ride by horse. Poirot cursed softly. In Frenchilis's impulsiveness was a complication he did not need. With Constable Hargrove in tow, Poirot borrowed a horse from the inn and rode to Ashford, the morning mist clinging to his coat like a shroud. The town was busier than Blackthorn, its streets bustling with market stalls and the clatter of carts. Poirot found Elias in a small boarding house, his face haggard, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table before him. The doctor started at Poirot's entrance, relief and guilt warring in his eyes. "Poirot, thank God," Elias said, his voice hoarse. "I had to come here. I couldn't stay in that village, not after the cane, not after everything." "Mon ami," Poirot said, his tone sharp but controlled, "you flee without a word, leaving only a note. You are fortunate I am not the killer, or you would be dead by now. Explain yourself." Elias slumped, his hands trembling. "I've been a coward, Poirot. Years ago, I found papers in my father's study records of a child, William Vance, taken to protect a secret. My father was the village doctor then, and he helped cover it up. He wrote of a pact, a deal with the ravens to hide the boy's fate. I buried it, told myself it was ancient history. But when Reginald started digging, I warned him, begged him to stop. Now I think I've brought this on us all. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind cataloguing every word. This pact, Elias, what was it? And why flee now? Elias swallowed hard. The papers mentioned a fortune, smuggled goods hidden by the ravens, entrusted to the Vance family. William saw something a hiding place. Perhaps Sand was silenced. I came to Ashford to find a man, old Tom, a former raven who knew my father. I thought he could confirm it, and did he? Poirot pressed, leaning on his cane. He's dead, Elias said, his voice breaking. Died last year, but his daughter gave me this. He slid a small, faded envelope across the table. Inside was a letter, its ink blurred but legible, dated 1876. It spoke of the boy's silence and the vault's location, signed with a raven's feather sketch. Poirot's moustache twitched. Mon Dieu, this is the heart of it. A fortune, a child, a betrayal. But why kill now, after so long? Before Elias could answer, a commotion erupted outside. A woman's scream, followed by shouts. Poirot and Hargrove rushed to the window, seeing a crowd forming in Market Square. They hurried out, pushing through the throng to find a man lying in the dirt, his throat bound by the smuggler's hitch, his eyes wide in death. The victim was Mr. Harold Wren, a local historian known for his work on Blackthorn's past. Hargrove cursed under his breath. Another one, in Ashford now. Poirot knelt, examining the knot, its loops identical to the others. Wren's satchel lay nearby, its contents spilled notebooks, maps, and a single page torn from a larger work, titled The Raven's Pact, Blackthorn's Hidden Shame. The page detailed the smuggling ring's collapse after William's disappearance, hinting at a surviving member who guarded the secret. Monsieur Hargrove, Poirot said, rising, this is no coincidence. Wren knew too much, just as the others did. The killer follows the trail of this pact, silencing all who touch it. Elias, trembling behind them, clutched the letter. This is my fault. I should have burned those papers years ago. Nan, Poirot said, his voice firm. The fault lies with the killer, and I will find them. But first, we return to Blackthorn. The village fete is tomorrow, a perfect stage for secrets to surface. I will set a trap. Back in Blackthorn, Poirot gathered his clues to lock it. The letter, Wren's torn pageant, devised a plan. The fete, a yearly celebration of harvest and community, would draw the village together, their guards lowered by cider and song. Poirot met with Hargrove at the inn, outlining his strategy. Spread a rumor, he said, that a witness saw the killer at the mill last night, someone who can name them. Let it reach every ear. The killer, they will act to silence this threat. Hargrove frowned. But there's no witness, sir. Poirot's eyes gleamed, presentiment. The killer does not know this. Fear will draw them out. As night fell, Poirot sat by the Willow House's fire, the letter from Ashford open before him. Elias, now under Hargrove's watch, paced nervously. You're playing with fire, Poirot, he said. This killer, they're ruthless. Oui, Poirot replied, but ruthlessness betrays them. They kill to protect a fortune, a pact, a name. Tomorrow, at the fete, I will watch, and the little grey cells, they will see what others miss. The chapter closed with Poirot studying. Wren's torn page, its words a map to a truth buried deep in Blackthorn's soil. The village slept, the fog curling like a conspirator, but Poirot's mind burned bright, ready to spring his trap. The killer was close, their desperation a beacon, and Poirot would not let it pass unnoticed. Chapter 8. The Fate's Facade. The Blackthorn Hollow fate unfolded under a sky bruised with clouds. The village green transformed into a riot of colour and sound. Stalls draped in bunting offered pies and cider, while children darted through. The crowd, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the villagers' undercurrent of fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the green, his immaculate suit a stark contrast to the rustic merriment, his green eyes scanning the faces of the villagers. For murders Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, and now Harold Renbound by the smuggler's hitch, pointed to a killer desperate to guard the secret of the Raven's pact, the locket, the letter from Ashford, and Wren's torn page, had deepened the mystery, but Poirot's trap, set with a whispered rumour of a witness, was now in motion. The killer, he knew, would not resist the bait. Poirot had instructed Constable Hargrove to spread the tale. A witness had seen the cloaked figure at the mill, ready to name the Raven. The rumour had spread like wildfire, whispered in the bakery, murmured at the inn, and now it hung in the air, as palpable as the scent of roasted chestnuts. Poirot mingled with the crowd, his cane a quiet tap against the grass, his senses attuned to every glance, every nervous gesture. Clara Vance stood by a cider stall, her auburn hair catching the light, her eyes darting as if expecting a shadow to emerge. Mrs. Carver clutched her rosary near the church tent, muttering prayers. Miss Evelyn Gray, the librarian, arranged books. At a charity stall, her smile tight. And Mayor Redmond, ever the charming host, moved through the crowd, shaking hands, his blue eyes scanning as keenly as Poirot's own. Monsieur Hargrove. Poirot murmured as the constable passed, "You have done well. The village buzzes with our tale. Now we watch." Hargrove nodded, his face tense. "I've got men posted at the edges, sir. If anyone bolts, we'll see him." Poirot's gaze lingered on Redmond, who was laughing with a group of farmers, his charm a polished mask. The mayor had been too quick with his alibi, to smooth in his answers. Poirot drifted closer, catching a snippet of conversation. "No need to worry, folks. Just a tall tale about witnesses." Redmond's laugh was hearty, but his eyes flicked toward the church, where a bell tolled the hour. As dusk fell, the fete grew livelier, lanterns casting a warm glow over the green. A fiddler struck up a tune, and villagers paired off to dance, their shadows swaying like ghosts. Poirot, however, remained vigilant, his mind turning over the clues. The smuggler's hitch, the locket, the letter mentioning a vault. The Raven's pact was no mere legend, was a contract sealed in blood, and the killer was its enforcer. But who? A sudden shout broke his thoughts. Smoke billowed from the town hall, its windows glowing orange as flames licked the curtains. The crowd surged, screams mingling with the fiddler's fading notes. Poirot pushed through, his cane forgotten, his heart racing with the certainty that this was no accident. Hargrove was already at the hall, shouting for buckets of water as villagers scrambled to help. "Monsieur," Poirot called, catching Hargrove's arm. "This fire, it is a diversion. The killer moves now, watch the crowd." Hargrove nodded, barking orders to his men, but Poirot's eyes were elsewhere. In the chaos, a figure slipped from the green, moving toward the churchyard. It was Redmond, his coat flapping as he hurried through the shadows. Poirot followed, his steps silent, his mind sharp. The mayor ducked behind the church, where a small shed stood, its door ajar. Poirot crept closer, peering through a crack in the wood. Inside, Redmond knelt by a pile of papers, a match in his hand, the air thick with the smell of kerosene. He was burning documents, letters, maps, a ledger like the one in Mrs. Finch's bakery. Poirot pushed the door open, his voice cutting through the crackle of flames. "Monsieur Redmond, you destroy evidence, n'est-ce pas? But the truth, it does not burn so easily." Redmond froze, the match falling from his hand. "Poirot, this isn't what it looks like. I'm protecting my family." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. Protecting or hiding? These papers, they speak of the Raven's Pact. You were quick to dismiss the witness, quick to laugh off the rumors. Why? Redmond's face twisted, a mix of fear and defiance. "You don't understand. My grandfather was a raven. Those papers, they'd ruin us, drag our name through the mud. I found them in the town hall archives, meant to destroy them quietly. I didn't kill anyone." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Yet you burn them now. In the chaos of a fire you may have set. Convenient, Nan." Before Redmond could reply, a villager's shout interrupted Hargrove, calling for Poirot. The fire was under control, but a singed letter had been found in the shed, half burned but legible. Poirot retrieved it, his gloved fingers careful. It read, "The Raven's heir must be protected. The vault remains hidden." The signature was a crude sketch of a raven's feather. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, pocketing the letter. "The heir, this is the key. Someone lives who claims the raven's fortune, and the killer guards it or seeks it." Redmond, pale and sweating, shook his head. "I swear, Poirot, I only wanted to keep the past buried. I'm no murderer." Poirot studied him, noting the tremor in his hands, the desperation in his eyes. "Perhaps, monsieur, but you know more. Then you say, you will remain with Hargrove until I am certain." As the fete resumed, its merriment subdued, Poirot returned to the green, the letter burning in his mind. The crowd was thinner now, faces strained with fear. Clara stood by the church, her eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before she turned away. Evelyn was packing up her stall, her movements brisk, almost frantic. Mrs. Carver had vanished. Her absence a quiet alarm in Poirot's thoughts at the Willow House. Poirot spread the letter beside the locket and Wren's torn page, Elias watching. Anxiously, "The heir," Poirot said, his voice low. The Raven's Pact was not just about a fortune, it was about a legacy, a child who survived. The killer strikes to protect this heir, or to claim the vault for themselves. Elias frowned. But who could it be? Clara. She's a Vance. But, Pater Poirot said, his eyes distant, or someone we have not yet seen clearly. Tomorrow I will search the manor again. The vault, it is there, hidden in plain sight. The chapter closed with Poirot staring into the fire, the singed letters, words echoing in his mind. The fate had been a facade, a stage for the killer's desperation, but Poirot's trap had yielded a clue. The Raven's heir was the heart of the mystery, and he would find them, no matter how deep the shadows of Blackthorn Hollow. Chapter 9. The airs burdened the morning in Blackthorn Hollow was heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading bonfires. The remnants of the previous night's fate lingering like a half-forgotten dream. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot of the manor's hill, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dew-soaked grass, his mind a kaleidoscope of clues. The singed letter from the town hall fire, the Raven's heir must be protected, had shifted the puzzle's shape. For murders, Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, and Harold Renich, tied by the smuggler's hitch, pointed to a killer guarding a legacy born of the Raven's pact, the locket, the letter from Ashford, and now this hint of an heir suggested, a living link to the vanished child, William Vance. Poirot's little grey cells hummed, sensing the truth was close, hidden in the manor's shadowed walls. He entered the manor alone. Constable Hargrove occupied with guarding Mayor Redmond, whose attempt to burn documents had cast suspicion but not proof. The foyer's silence was oppressive, the air thick with dust motes dancing in slanted light. Poirot's cane tapped softly as he moved to the study, where the secret passage had first revealed its secrets. The journal, the locket, the photograph all pointed to a vault, a hidden fortune tied to the Raven's smuggling days. But where was it? As he searched the study, rifling through drawers and tapping walls for hollows, a soft knock broke the silence. Clara Vance stood in the doorway, her auburn hair loose, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice low, "I need to show you something. It's about father." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Mademoiselle, you choose a curious moment to speak. What is this something?" She hesitated, then drew a small, leather-bound diary from her pocket. "Mother's diary. I found it in the attic last night, after the fete. Father never let me read it, but I think it's important." Poirot took the diary, its pages brittle, the ink faded but legible. He opened it, scanning entries from decades past. Clara's mother, Margaret Vance, wrote of her husband's obsession with the family's past, of whispered arguments about a pact and a child lost to the river. One entry, dated 1895, caught Poirot's eye. Reginald swears heel. "Find the vault. The Raven's legacy. He says it's ours by right, but I fear the cost. The boy's shadow haunts us, and the Raven watches." Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured. "Your mother knew of the pact. And you, mademoiselle, you are the heir, Nessie P." The last of the Vance line. Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "I don't know about any heir. Father never spoke of it, only of duty, of keeping the family name untarnished. But after he changed his will, I wondered, was he protecting me or hiding something?" Poirot studied her, noting the tremble in her hands, the earnestness in her voice. "And this diary, you found it only now. Why bring it to me?" "Because," she said, her voice breaking, "I'm scared. Someone's watching me, Mr. Poirot. Last night, after the fire, I saw a shadow outside my cottage. I think they know I have this." Before Poirot could respond, a crash echoed from the village, below a scream, sharp and guttural, cutting through the morning quiet. He and Clara hurried to the window, seeing smoke rising from the tavern. Poirot's heart sank. "Nan, not." "Another," he said, grabbing his cane and rushing down the hill, Clara at his heels. The tavern was in chaos. Villagers gathered around a body slumped in the alley behind. It was Mr. Giles, the tavern keeper, his throat bound by the smuggler's hitch, his face frozen in a grimace of terror. The alley's cobblestones were slick with dew, but no footprints marked the scene. Another impossible murder. Poirot knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the knot, his mind racing. Giles had been a jovial man, quick with a pint and a story, but his ledger found in his pocket-listed payments to R, each marked with a raven's feather sketch, Monsieur Hargrove. Poirot called, as the constable pushed through the crowd. "This is no random killing." Giles knew the Raven, perhaps demanded payment for silence, like Mrs. Finch. Hargrove's face was grim. 5 dead, sir. The village is falling apart. Nan, Poirot said, rising. The village is a stage, and the killer plays a desperate role. This ledger, it points to the raven, and the raven points to the vault. Clara, pale beside him, clutched the diary. Mr. Poirot, what does it mean? Why Giles? Poirot turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. Because, mademoiselle, the raven's heir is alive, and the killer fears exposure. You, I think, are that heir. Your mother's diary, it holds a clue to the vault's location. Back at the manor, Poirot pored over the diary, its pages revealing more of Margaret's fears. A final entry, written in a trembling hand, mentioned a crypt beneath the old chapel, a place Reginald had searched but never found. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Voila, the vault. Not in the manor, but nearby, hidden where the ravens once met. He turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, you will come with me. The chapel, it is our next step. Clara hesitated, her eyes wide. But, if the killer's watching, then we must be swift, Poirot said, his tone unyielding. The truth, it waits for no one. The chapel was a crumbling stone structure, half swallowed by ivy, its windows boarded. Poirot and Clara entered, the air cold and heavy with the scent of decay. A trapdoor, hidden beneath a pew, led to a crypt below, its walls etched with the same raven symbols Poirot had seen in the manor's secret chamber. In the center stood a stone slab, its edges worn but intact. Poirot examined it, his fingers finding a hidden catch. The slab shifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Mon Dieu, Poirot whispered, his lantern casting shadows on the damp walls. The vault, it is here. Before they could descend, a shadow moved above a figure, cloaked. Slipping through the chapel door, Clara gasped, but Poirot's hand steadied her. Stay close, he said, his voice low. The figure was gone, but the message was clear. The killer knew they were close. The chapter closed with Poirot standing at the crypt's entrance, the diary in one hand, the lantern in the other, Clara's frightened eyes beside him. The vault lay below, its secrets ready to be unearthed, but the raven's shadow loomed larger than ever. Poirot's resolve was a beacon, guiding him into the darkness, where the truth and the killer awaited. Chapter 10. The crypt's revelation. The air in the old chapel was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient secrets, the silence broken only by the faint drip of water echoing in the crypt below. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the hidden staircase, his lantern casting a trembling light into the darkness, his heart steady despite the weight of 5 murders pressing on his mind. Reginald, Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, Harold Wren, and now Giles, the tavern keeper, all bound by the smuggler's hitch, all silenced to protect the raven's pact and its elusive vault. Clara Vance, clutching her mother's diary, stood beside him, her auburn hair damp with sweat, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. The shadow that had fled the chapel moments ago was a warning, but Poirot's resolve was unshakable. The truth lay below, and he would uncover it. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice low but firm, stay close and be silent. The killer knows we are here, but the little grey cells, they are not so easily outwitted. Clara nodded, her grip tightening on the diary as they descended the narrow stairs. The crypt was a cavernous chamber, its walls carved with faded runes, ravens, crescents, and cryptic initials that spoke of a forgotten brotherhood. The air was cold, the silence oppressive, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional skitter of unseen creatures. At the far end, a heavy iron door stood, its surface etched with a single raven's head, its eyes glinting with inlaid obsidian. Poirot examined the door, his gloved fingers tracing the locker-complex mechanism. Unlike any he'd seen. Mon Dieu, he murmured, this is no ordinary vault. It was built to guard something precious or dangerous. Clara's voice trembled. The diary. Mother wrote of a key, hidden in the manor. Father searched for it but never found it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then we must think as the ravens did. A key, it is not always metal. Sometimes it is knowledge. He opened the diary, scanning Margaret's final entries. One passage stood out. The raven's eye sees all, but only the heart opens the way. Interessant, Poirot said. Turning to the door, he pressed the obsidian eyes, and with a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a carved slot shaped like a heart. From his pocket, Poirot produced the locket from the mill, its heart-shaped frame a perfect match. He inserted it, and the door groaned, swinging inward to reveal a chamber lit by a single, flickering torch. Inside, shelves lined the walls, stacked with ledgers, gold coins, and sealed crates remnants of the Raven's smuggling empire. A wooden table held a single book, its cover embossed with a raven. Poirot opened it, finding records of shipments, payments, and a chilling entry. William Vance, taken 1875 to ensure silence. The pact holds. Beside it was a list of names: Edward Vance, the doctor's father, and others Poirot didn't recognize, all marked as bound by oath. Clara gasped, reading over his shoulder. They took him, my uncle. We, Poirot said, his voice grave. Your family's wealth, it was built on betrayal. William saw the vault, perhaps, and was silenced, not drowned, but hidden. The killer murders to keep this secret, to protect the fortune or the shame. Before they could explore further, a low rumble shook the chamber, dust falling from the ceiling. Poirot's head snapped up. We are not alone. He grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her back toward the stairs, but the iron door slammed shut, the locket falling to the floor. A figure stepped from the shadows. Miss Evelyn Grey, the librarian, her grey eyes cold, a pistol in her hand. Her severe bun was loosened, strands framing a face twisted with determination. Mademoiselle Grey, Poirot said, his voice calm despite the gun. You are the Raven, n'est-ce pas? The keeper of this vault, the one who ties the smugglers. Hitch. Evelyn's lips curled. You're too clever, Mr. Poirot. I warned you to stop, but you wouldn't listen. This vault, this pact, it's mine to protect. The Vance family betrayed us, and now they pay. Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking. You killed my father, Giles, all of them. They knew too much, Evelyn said, her voice steady. Reginald found the crypt's entrance. Brodie saw me here. Finch and Giles demanded payment. Wren was writing his damned book. They all threatened the pact. But I didn't act alone. Poirot's mustache twitched. Nan, you had an accomplice. Someone who helped you move unseen, who placed Ilias's cane by the river, who Evelyn laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You'll never know. The pact is bigger than you, bigger than this village. Step back, or I shoot. Before Poirot could respond, the floor beneath them shuddered, a crack splitting the stone. The torch flickered, and in that moment of distraction, Poirot lunged, knocking the pistol from Evelyn's hand. Clara screamed as the gun skittered across the floor, and Evelyn dove for it, but the ground gave way. a trapdoor collapsing beneath her. She fell with a cry, vanishing into the darkness below. The sound of tumbling stone echoing. Poirot pulled Clara back, his heart pounding. Mon Dieu, this place, it is a trap within a trap. We must leave, now. They scrambled up the stairs, the crypt groaning as if alive. The chapel was empty, the fog outside thicker than ever. Poirot clutched the Raven's book, its pages a map to the truth, but Evelyn's words lingered. I didn't act alone. The killer was not just one, but two, and the second shadow remained hidden at the Willow House. Poirot spread the book's contents before Elias, who had returned under Hargreaves' guard. Evelyn Grey, Poirot said. She was the Raven, or one of them. She guarded the vault, killed to protect it. But there is another, someone who moves in her shadow. Elias paled. Evelyn, the librarian, but she was so quiet. We, Poirot said, and the quiet ones, they hide the deepest secrets. Tomorrow I will find her accomplice. The book, it names names, and one will lead me to the truth. The chapter closed with Poirot studying the Raven's book, its list of oath-bound names, a guide to the killer's partner. The fog outside swirled, the village silent, but Poirot's mind was a beacon cutting through the darkness. Evelyn's fall was not the end, only a step closer to unmasking the Raven's true face. Chapter 11. The Accomplices' Masks. The morning in Blackthorn Hollow broke with a brittle edge, the fog retreating to reveal a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Hercule Poirot stood in the Willow House's parlour, the Raven's book from the crypt open before him, its pages a litany of names and oaths tied to the smuggling ring that had birthed the Raven's pact. 5 murders: Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, Harold Wren, and Giles the tavern-keeper had been pinned to Miss Evelyn Grey, the librarian who had confessed in the crypt before her fall. But her words, "I didn't act alone," echoed in Poirot's mind, a warning that the true Raven, or their partner, still lurked in the village's shadows. The smuggler's hitch, the locket, the singed letter, and now this book formed a constellation of clues. And Poirot's little grey cells were alight, seeking the accomplice's mask. He turned to the list of names in the book, scanning for connections. One stood out: Samuel Lyle, a name linked to payments in the 1870s, a man who had served the Vance family. Poirot's memory sparked. Mrs. Lyle, the manor's housekeeper, had mentioned a husband, long dead, but her son, Mr. Jacob Lyle, was Mayor Redmond's aide, a quiet man with a sailor's build and a habit of lingering at the edges of crowds. Could he be the accomplice, tied to the Ravens by blood and knot? Poirot set out for the town hall where Jacob Lyle worked, his cane tapping a determined rhythm against the cobblestones. The village was subdued, the fate's aftermath leaving faces drawn and whispers hushed. At the town hall, Lyle was sorting papers, his lean frame hunched, his eyes darting as Poirot entered. "Monsieur Lyle," Poirot said, his voice smooth but piercing. "A word, if you please. The knot used in these murders, it is a smuggler's hitch, known to the Ravens. Your father, he was one of them, n'est-ce pas?" Lyle's hands froze, a paper crumpling in his grip. "My father, he died when I was a boy. I don't know anything about knots or Ravens." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Yet you have the hands of a sailor, monsieur, and the knot, it is not easily learned. Miss Grey, she confessed to the murders, but she spoke of another. You, I think, know more than you say." Lyle's face hardened, and he stood, his height imposing. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm just an aide, nothing more." Before Poirot could press further, a shout rang out from the street, a woman's cry, sharp with panic. Poirot and Lyle rushed outside, joining a growing crowd near the stables. There, sprawled in the hay, lay young Peter Dunn, a stable hand who tended the manor's horses. His throat bore the smuggler's hitch, his eyes wide in death, a pitchfork clutched in his stiff fingers. The ground was dry, no footprints to betray the killer. Another impossible crime. Constable Hargrove pushed through, his face grim. 6 dead, sir. This is madness. Nan, Poirot said, kneeling by the body. It is method. Peter saw something. Perhaps at the manor, perhaps in the crypt. The killer moves to silence all who know the Raven's secret. Lyle lingered at the edge of the crowd, his eyes flickering with something Poirot couldn't place, fear or guilt. Poirot rose, addressing Hargrove. Monsieur, search Mr. Lyle's quarters. If he is the accomplice, there will be evidence. Lyle's face paled, and he bolted, shoving through the crowd toward the woods. Hargrove gave chase, his men following, and Poirot watched, his mind racing. The flight was an admission, but not proof. He returned to the town hall, where Lyle's desk held a locked drawer. With Hargrove's key, Poirot opened it, finding a bundle of letters, one marked with a raven's feather. It read, "Meet at Cliffs, midnight. The vault is compromised." The handwriting matched Evelyn's. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured. Lyle was her partner, but is he the mastermind or a pawn? Hargrove returned, breathless, with Lyle in handcuffs. Caught him at the river, sir. He was trying to cross. Lyle's eyes were wild, his voice hoarse. I didn't kill anyone. Evelyn, she made me help. She said the vault was my birthright, that my father was cheated. I tied the knots, yes, but I didn't kill. Poirot leaned closer, his gaze unyielding, and the cane by the river, the fire at the fete. You aided her, we. Lyle nodded, tears streaming. She threatened my mother, said she'd expose her as a raven's widow. I had no choice. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet you fled, monsieur. If you are innocent, why run? Lyle's voice broke. Because I'm next. Evelyn said there's another, someone above her, pulling the strings. They'll kill me to keep me quiet. Poirot stepped back, his mind whirling. Another, the Raven's pact was a hydra, each head. Revealing another, he turned to Hargrove. Keep him secure, but do not judge yet. There is a greater shadow here. At the Willow House, Poirot spread the letters beside the Raven's book, Elias watching anxiously. Lyle is the accomplice, Poirot said, but not the mind. Evelyn spoke of another, and Lyle confirms it. The cliffs, tonight they are the next stage. Elias paled. You're going, after all this. We, Poirot said, his voice firm. The killer expects me to falter. But Hercule Poirot does not retreat. The cliffs will reveal the Raven's true face. The chapter closed with Poirot preparing for the midnight meeting, the raven-marked letter in his hand, Lyle's confession a weight in his mind. The fog crept back, cloaking Blackthorn Hollow, but Poirot's resolve was a flame burning through the darkness. The accomplices' mask had slipped, but the mastermind remained, and Poirot would face them on the cliff's edge. Chapter 12. The cliffs edged the night over Blackthorn Hollow was a canvas of inky black, pierced only by the faint gleam of stars struggling through the thinning fog. Hercule Poirot stood at the base of the cliffs that loomed over the village, their jagged edges silhouetted against the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. The letter found in Jacob Lyle's desk. Meet at Cliffs midnight. The vault is compromised, burned in Poirot's mind. A summons to confront the shadow behind 6 murders. Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, Harold Wren, Giles the tavern-keeper, and Peter Dunn. Miss Evelyn Grey, the librarian, had confessed to the killings in the crypt. But her claim of an accomplice above her, echoed by Lyle's tearful admission, pointed to a mastermind still hidden. The smuggler's hitch, the raven's pact, the vault's secret saw converged here. On the cliff's edge, Poirot had instructed Constable Hargrove to station men at the cliff's base, hidden among the rocks, their lanterns dimmed to avoid detection. Monsieur Poirot had said, his voice steady, "The killer will come, driven by fear or greed. Be ready." Now, as the village clock tolled midnight, Poirot climbed the narrow path to the cliff's summit, his cane a quiet tap. Against the stone, his senses sharpened by the thrill of the hunt. The wind howled, carrying the salt tanks of the distant sea, and the fog swirled. A restless conspirator at the cliff's edge, a lone figure stood, cloaked in black, their hood obscuring their face. The lantern at their feet cast a flickering glow, revealing the same raven-headed ring Poirot had seen at the mill. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the wind. "Madame Grey, or should I say, the Raven. You survived the crypt's collapse. Nest ce pas." The figure turned, and Evelyn's sharp grey eyes met his, no longer hidden by the hood. Her face was bruised, her bun unravelled, but her gaze was unyielding. "You're persistent, Poirot," she said, her voice cold. "I thought the crypt would end you, but here you are, meddling still." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The little grey cells, they are not so easily buried. You killed to protect the vault, to guard the raven's fortune. But you spoke of another, a master above you. Who is it?" Evelyn's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you've won. The pact is bigger than me, bigger than this village. The vault's contents gold, secrets, power belong to the raven's heir, and I'll die before I let you take them." She stepped closer, her hands slipping into her cloak, and Poirot tensed, sensing danger. "Madame," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you are cornered. Lyle has confessed, the village watchers, and the truth. It is no longer yours to hide. Surrender and name your master." Evelyn laughed, a sharp, desperate sound, and drew a knife, its blade glinting in the lantern's light. "You're alone, Poirot. No one's coming to save you." She lunged, aiming for his chest, but Poirot sidestepped, his agility surprising her. He swung his cane, catching her wrist, and the knife clattered to the ground. In the struggle, she stumbled toward the cliff's edge, her cloak catching on a jagged rock. Poirot seized the moment, grabbing a length of rope from the ground left, perhaps by a fisherman, and looped it around her wrists, tying it with a simple knot. The smuggler's hitch. "You see," he said, breathless but composed, "I learn from my enemies. Now, Madame, speak. Who is the Raven's master?" Evelyn struggled, her eyes wild. "You'll never stop them. They're everywhere, watching, waiting. The pact was sealed in blood, and it will end in blood." Before Poirot could react, a gust of wind roared up the cliff, and Evelyn twisted free, her foot slipping on the wet stone. She teetered, her scream swallowed by the wind, and fell, vanishing into the dark sea below. Poirot stood frozen, the rope dangling in his hands, the lantern's light flickering. He peered over the edge, but the waves crashed against the rocks, hiding any trace of her. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, his heart heavy. Evelyn was gone, but her words lingered. Master, a shadow above her. Still free. Hargrove and his men scrambled up the path, their lanterns bobbing. "Sir," Hargrove called, his face pale. "We heard a scream." "Was that her?" "We," Poirot said, his voice grim. "Miss Grey, the Raven, is lost to the sea." But she was not alone. She spoke of a master, someone who pulls the strings. "We must return to the manor. The vault, it holds the final answers." Back at the Willow House, Poirot spread his cloister. Raven's book, the locket, the singed letter, and Lyle's confession bee for Dr. Elias Hawthorne, who sat trembling, his face ashen. "Evelyn's dead?" Elias asked, his voice barely audible. "And there's another." "We," Poirot said, his eyes fixed on the book's list of names. Lyle was her tool, but someone else orchestrated this. The vault, it is not just gold, it is power, a legacy. The mastermind kills to protect it or to claim it. Elias shook his head. "I should have told you everything from the start. My father, he was part of it, Poirot. He hid the truth about William, about the pact. I thought it was over, but it's alive, killing us all." Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve hardened. "Mon ami, the past is a weight, but we will lift it. Tomorrow I return to the manor. The vault's secrets will unmask this mastermind." The chapter closed with Poirot standing by the window, the sea's distant roar a reminder of Evelyn's fall. The fog had lifted, but the village felt no lighter, its secrets coiled tighter. Than ever, the Raven's master remained, a shadow in the wings, but Poirot's mind was a blade, ready to cut through the final veil. Chapter 13. The mastermind unmasked. The dawn over Blackthorn Hollow was a fragile thing, its pale light barely piercing the clouds that hung like a shroud over the village. Hercule Poirot stood in the Willow House's parlour, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his mind a storm of connections. The Raven's book, the locket, the singed letter, and Jacob Lyle's confession had led him to Evelyn Grey, who had confessed to the murders before her fatal fall from the cliffs. Yet her words, they're everywhere, and Lyle's fear of a higher power pointed to a mastermind still hidden. The true architect of 6 murders, Reginald Vance, Tom Brodie, Mrs. Finch, Harold Wren, Giles the tavern keeper, and Peter Dunn. The smuggler's hitch, the Raven's pact, and the vault's secrets converged on one truth. Someone had orchestrated this bloodshed to protect a legacy, and Poirot was determined to unmask them. The clues pointed back to the manor, where the vault's contents gold, ledgers, and the truth about William Vance's disappearance lay hidden. But Evelyn's mention of a master above her suggested a deeper betrayal, someone woven into Blackthorn's fabric, trusted yet treacherous. Poirot's thoughts turned to Dr. Elias Hawthorne, whose cryptic letter had summoned him, whose father had been complicit in the pact, and whose sudden disappearance, marked by the cane at the river, now seemed too convenient. Was Elias a victim or the puppeteer? Poirot set out for the manor, Constable Hargrove at his side, the Raven's book tucked under his arm. The village was hushed, its streets empty, as if holding its breath. At the manor, Poirot retraced his steps to the study, where the secret passage had first revealed the crypt's existence. "Monsieur Hargrove," he said, his voice steady, "we must search for signs of Elias. His cane, his absence, it was a performance, I think, to divert suspicion." Hargrove frowned, his brow creasing. "You think the doctor's behind this?" "He's been helping us, sir." "Precisement," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The perfect disguise is to appear. The ally, let us see what the manor hides." In the study, Poirot examined the desk. finding a hidden compartment beneath a false drawer. Inside was a single key, its head carved with a raven silhouette. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the key to the vault, kept here all along." Elias. He knew more than he admitted. Before they could return to the crypt, a commotion erupted outside, a shout, followed by the clatter of hooves. Poirot rushed to the window, seeing a horse galloping toward the village, its rider cloaked. Hargrove's men gave chase, but Poirot's focus was elsewhere. A faint smell of smoke drifted from the hallway, and he followed it to the manor's library, where flames licked at a pile of papers in the fireplace. Among them was a photograph, half burned, showing a young Elias with an older man, his father, perhaps Sander Boy, who matched William Vance's portrait. Poirot extinguished the flames, salvaging the photograph. "Elias," he said, his voice low, "you burn the past, but it betrays you." Hargrove returned, breathless. "The rider got away, sir, but we found this in the stable." He held out a scrap of cloth, torn and stained, embroidered with the initials E.H.W., Poirot said, pocketing the cloth. "Elias Hawthorne. He faked his disappearance, staged the cane, and now he destroys evidence. He is the Raven's master, the one who set Evelyn and Lyle in motion." Poirot devised a plan to lure Elias out. He instructed Hargrove to spread word that the vault's key had been found and would be opened at dusk, with the village invited to witness. "The mastermind he cannot resist," Poirot said. "He will come to protect his legacy." At dusk, the manor's great hall was filled with villagers, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Clara Vance stood near the front, her eyes haunted, the diary clutched in her hands. Major Redmond, under guard, watched silently, his charm dimmed. Poirot stood by the crypt's entrance, the key in his hand, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Madame, et messieurs, the Raven's pact has claimed 6 lives, but tonight the truth is revealed. The vault holds not just gold, but a child, taken to protect a fortune. The mastermind, he is among us." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and then a figure stepped forward. Elias Hawthorne, his face pale but composed, his eyes burning with defiance. "Enough, Poirot," he said, his voice steady. "You've gone too far." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mon ami, you have gone further. You faked your disappearance, used Evelyn and Lyle to kill, all to guard the Raven's fortune. Your father was a Raven, and you inherited his shame." Elias laughed, a brittle sound. "Shame, it was power. My father hid William Vance, ensured the pact's secrecy. I protected it, kept the village safe. Those who died, they threatened everything." The crowd gasped, Clara stepping back, her eyes wide. Poirot raised the key, his voice unyielding. "And the vault? You would kill to keep it closed." Elias lunged, grabbing for the key, but Hargrove's men seized him, pinning his arms. Poirot opened the crypt's door, revealing the gold and ledgers within. "The fortune," he said, "it belongs to no one. It is blood money, and it ends tonight." Elias struggled, his voice rising. "You can't undo the pact. It's bigger than you," Nen Poirot said, his eyes cold. "Nothing is bigger than justice. You are unmasked, monsieur." The chapter closed with Elias in chains, the crowd silent, the vault's contents laid bare. Poirot stood alone, the key in his hand, his heart heavy with the cost of truth. The Raven's master was caught, but the darkness of the pact lingered, a shadow not easily dispelled. Chapter 14. The Little Grey Cells. Triumph the morning sun rose over Blackthorn Hollow with a clarity that seemed to mock the village's recent darkness, casting long shadows across the cobblestones and bathing the manor's weathered facade in a golden glow. Hercule Poirot stood in the village square, where the nightmare had begun with Reginald Vance's murder, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes reflecting a quiet triumph, tempered by the weight of 6 lives lost. The Ravens' Pact, a decades-old conspiracy born of greed and betrayal, had been unraveled, its mastermind Dr. Elias Hawthorne now in chains. His confession exposing a web of smuggling, secrecy, and murder. The vault's contents, the locket, the singed letters, and the smuggler's hitch had all pointed to a truth Poirot had pieced together with his little grey cells. Today he would lay it bare for the village, closing the case with a final, satisfying resolution. The villagers gathered in the church hall, their faces a mosaic of relief, fear, and curiosity. Clara Vance stood near the front, her auburn hair neatly pinned, her eyes clear but haunted. Major Edmund, cleared of murder but chastened by his attempt to burn evidence, sat stiffly beside Constable Hargrove. Mrs. Carver clutched her rosary, her lips moving silently, while Miss Evelyn Grey's absence was a palpable void. Her fall from the cliffs, a grim epilogue to her role as the Raven's enforcer. Jacob Lyle, the accomplice, remained under guard, his tearful confession a key to unmasking Elias. Poirot stepped to the centre of the hall, his cane a steady tap, his voice clear and commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his moustache twitching slightly, "Blackthorn Hollow has suffered a great darkness, 6 murders, each tied by a knot, each a piece of a puzzle that began long ago. Today, Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth so that you may find peace." He held up the Raven's book, its pages worn but damning. In 1875, a smuggling ring known as the Ravens operated along this river, their wealth hidden in a vault beneath the old chapel. The Vance family, led by Edward Vance, profited from their silence. But a boy, William Vance, Edward's brother, saw too much. To protect their fortune, the Ravens took him, claiming he drowned. This was the Ravens' Pact, a vow of secrecy, sealed in betrayal. The crowd murmured, Clara's hands tightening in her lap. Poirot continued, his voice unwavering. "Dr. Elias Hawthorne's father, the village doctor, helped hide this truth, and Elias inherited the burden. When Reginald Vance began uncovering the pact, Elias orchestrated a campaign of murder to protect the vault's secrets. He used Miss Evelyn Grey, a descendant of a Raven, and Jacob Lyle, whose father was also bound to the pact. They killed Reginald, Tom, Brodie, Mrs. Finch, Harold Wren, Giles, and Peter Dunwich, a threat to the fortune or the shame it carried." Poirot paused, his eyes sweeping the room. Elias staged his own disappearance, placing his cane by the river to divert suspicion. Evelyn tied the smuggler's hitch, a signature of their past, while Lyle aided her, driven by fear and promises of wealth. But the little grey cells, they saw through the fog. The locket, the letters, the vault, they led me to the crypt, where Evelyn confessed before her fall. And last night, Elias, desperate to destroy the evidence, revealed himself as the mastermind. Hargrove stood, holding up the key to the vault. "We've opened it, sir. Gold, ledgers, proof of the all there. What do we do with it?" Poirot's gaze softened, turning to Clara. "Mademoiselle Vance, you are the last of your line, the heir to this tainted fortune. What say you?" Clara rose, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "It's blood money. I want no part of it. Let it go to the village to rebuild, to heal. No more secrets. The crowd nodded, some with tears, others with relief. Poirot smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. Bean, the fortune will serve justice, not greed. The pact is broken, its shadows dispelled. As the villagers dispersed, Clara approached. Poirot, her eyes searching his. Mr. Poirot, I thought I'd lost everything. Thank you. Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle, the truth. It is a heavy burden, but it sets us free. You are clear of suspicion, and your father's memory, it is honored. At the Willow House, Poirot packed his case, the Raven's book and locket now in Hargrove's custody. Elias, awaiting trial, had confessed fully, detailing the pact's history and his father's role. The village felt lighter, the fog lifting as if in response to the truth. Yet Poirot's heart was heavy. The cost of the case, 6 lives, a village's trust weighing on him. He had seen humanity's darkness, its greed and betrayal, but also its capacity for redemption in Clara's choice. As he boarded the train, the station master tipped his cap, his earlier unease replaced by gratitude. You've done us a service. Mr. Poirot, he said, Blackthorn's itself again. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. Oui, monsieur, but the little grey cells, they never rest. The world, it is full of puzzles, and I, Hercule Poirot, will always answer their call. The train whistle blew, and as Blackthorn Hollow faded into the mist, Poirot leaned back, his mind already turning to the next mystery. The Raven's pact was ended, the vault's secrets laid bare, and justice served. The chapter and the case closed, with the train's steady rhythm carrying Poirot away from the darkness toward new horizons, his faith in order restored.